An exciting story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. She was raised by nuns in silence, never knowing love or her own body. But then she was sold to a millionaire. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised. If you enjoy stories of love and romance, subscribe to this channel. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. The mountains of Virginia hide secrets just as they once concealed gold during the early settler days. Among the rolling hills of the Shenandoah region, where morning mists dance between pines and hemlocks, stands the monastery of St. Catherine like a fortress of stone and silence. It was there, at the rusted iron gates of that century-old building, that a newborn was found on a cold May morning, wrapped only in a white wool blanket and wearing a small gold chain with a medallion of the Virgin Mary. The sisters named her Aurora for the golden color of her fine hair, and raised her under the strict rules of a life dedicated to prayer and work. 19 years later, as the first light of dawn illuminated the chapel's stained glass windows, Aurora knelt on the worn wooden pew where she always prayed, but her prayers that morning were different. They were prayers of farewell. Sister Bernadette had given her the news the previous evening, with that formal tone she used to announce punishments or extra chores. "It's a blessing, my child," said the Mother Superior, her bony hands intertwined over her black habit. "Mr. Dominic West has saved our congregation from ruin. He is a man of faith, a generous benefactor. He will be a good husband for you." Aurora didn't question it. She never questioned anything. She had been educated to accept divine will manifested through the sisters' words. But something inside her, a small, insistent voice that she had always tried to silence, whispered that this wasn't God's will. It was business. It was an exchange. It was her being handed over as payment for a debt she never incurred. The monastery was going through difficult times. Donations were scarce, the roof needed urgent repairs, and the aging congregation wasn't attracting new vocations. Then he appeared, Dominic West, descendant of European immigrants who had prospered in agribusiness and wine production. His vineyards spread across 3 states, and his businesses, it was whispered, went far beyond grapes and land. Aurora saw him for the first time 3 days before the wedding, when he arrived at the monastery in a black SUV, accompanied only by a silent driver. She was in the garden, collecting herbs for the apothecary sister, when she heard the sound of tires on the beaten earth of the inner courtyard. She instinctively hid behind the rose bushes, observing that tall, elegant man greet the Mother Superior with a respectful but distant reverence. Dominic West was everything she had never encountered within those holy walls. Tall, broad-shouldered, he carried an aura of power that seemed to fill the space around him. His dark suit contrasted with the Franciscan simplicity of the place, and his movements were precise, economical, like those of a predator that doesn't waste energy. When he turned toward the garden, Aurora saw his eyes for an instant, dark as pitch, penetrating, carrying an intensity that made her retreat among the plants. He didn't see her at that moment, but something in his posture suggested he knew he was being watched. Aurora felt her heart race when he smiled slightly, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, before following the Mother Superior into the main building. That night, lying in her narrow bed in the novices' dormitory, Aurora couldn't sleep. For the first time in 19 years, her mind refused to accept prayers as a tranquilizer. Instead, she found herself imagining what this man's voice would be like, what it would be like to live away from these walls, what it would be like to be touched by hands other than her own. The thought frightened her so much that she got up and knelt on the cold floor, fervently praying for God to forgive her impure thoughts. But the words came mechanically from her mouth, while her mind obsessively returned to those dark eyes and that enigmatic smile. The wedding was set for a Thursday in the monastery's small chapel. Aurora woke before the 5 o'clock bell, overcome by a restlessness she couldn't name. She had dreamed of endless vineyards stretching to the horizon and of a dark-haired woman crying in front of a broken mirror. The sisters prepared her in solemn silence. Sister Lucy, the youngest in the congregation, brushed her golden hair until it shone like silk, then tied it in a simple braid adorned with small white flowers picked from the garden. The dress was a donation from the West family itself. Raw, silk in ivory color, simple but elegantly cut, which highlighted the slender silhouette that Aurora barely knew. "You look beautiful, my child," murmured Sister Bernadette, adjusting the lace. Veil that had belonged to the monastery's founder. "May God bless you on this new journey." But there was something in the superior's tone, a melancholy disguised as solemnity, that made Aurora look her in the eyes for the first time in years. What she saw there disturbed her. It wasn't joy for her future happiness. It was relief, the relief of someone getting rid of a burden. The ceremony was brief and austere. Besides the sisters, only a few employees of the West family were present. Men in dark suits who kept their eyes lowered and spoke only when necessary. Dominic arrived punctually at 9 o'clock, also dressed in dark colors, bringing a bouquet of white roses that he handed to Aurora with a courteous bow. When she approached the white marble altar, her fingers were trembling so much that she almost dropped the flowers. Dominic extended his hand to steady her, and his touch was like an electric shock. His skin was warm and rough, the hands of a man who knew hard work, despite his urban elegance. Father Joseph, an elderly man who came from Shenandoah especially, for the occasion, conducted the ceremony with religious efficiency. The sacramental words echoed through the ancient stones of the chapel, but Aurora barely heard them. She was hypnotized by the presence of the man beside her, by the way he responded to the vows with a deep, controlled voice, as if he were closing a business deal rather than getting married. When it came time for the kiss, Dominic turned to her with an indecipherable expression. His eyes studied her for a moment too long, as if trying to memorize every detail of her face. Then he leaned in and touched her lips with his, a chaste, quick contact, but one that left Aurora with the strange sensation that something fundamental had changed inside her. The journey to the West property took 2 hours along winding roads that cut through preserved forests. Dominic drove in silence, only occasionally pointing out a particularly beautiful view or commenting on the region's history. Aurora, settled in the soft leather seat of the SUV, watched the landscape gradually change from pine-covered mountains to verdant valleys dotted with vineyards organized in perfect rows. "The vines were planted by my great-grandfather," said Dominic as they passed the first vineyards of the property. "He brought the seedlings directly from Europe, along with family secrets for making the perfect wine." It was the first time he had spoken about family, and Aurora took advantage of the opening. "Do you have siblings?" "No." The answer was dry, definitive. "I'm the last of the Wests in America." They passed through a majestic stone entrance where 2 enormous pillars supported a wrought iron gate with the family crest, a stylized vine intertwined with a sword. The private road continued for another 15 minutes, winding between hills covered with grapevines until they finally spotted the mansion. The West Manor rose at the top of a hill like a palace transplanted directly from Europe. 3 stories of light grey stone, with wrought iron balconies and tall windows framed by century-old ivy. Formal gardens spread out in terraced levels, and in the distance, Aurora could see other buildings, what appeared to be wine cellars, employee houses, and industrial facilities. "It's very big," she whispered, suddenly feeling very small. "It was bigger when I was a child," Dominic replied, and there was something bitter in his voice. "My father believed a man should live up to his importance. I learned that sometimes it's better to keep certain things closed." He stopped the SUV in front of the main entrance, where 2 uniformed staff waited to carry Aurora's small suitcase. Everything she owned in the world fit into a fabric bag that the sisters had given her as a wedding gift. The mansion's main door was made of solid wood carved with motifs of grapes and vine leaves. When it opened, it revealed an impressive entrance hall with black and white marble floor in a checkerboard pattern, a curved staircase leading to the upper floors, and a crystal chandelier that projected colorful reflections on the walls. "Welcome to your new home," said Dominic, but his voice lacked warmth. "Mrs. Campbell, the housekeeper, will show you to your quarters. We dine at 8. If you need anything before then, just ask any staff member." And with that, he walked away, his footsteps echoing on the marble until he disappeared down a side corridor, leaving Aurora alone with a middle-aged woman with grey hair, tied in a severe bun, and eyes that seemed to see everything. "This way." "A Mrs. West," said Mrs. Campbell, and Aurora felt a shiver when she heard her new name. "Your quarters are on the second floor." As she climbed the staircase, Aurora noticed the portraits adorning the walls, men with thick mustaches and hard looks, women in dark dresses and melancholy expressions. "All Wests from past generations," explained Mrs. Campbell, until they reached a more recent portrait of a young couple. The man was clearly Dominic, perhaps 10 years younger, and beside him was a woman of extraordinary beauty, hair as dark as night, hypnotic green eyes, and a smile that radiated genuine joy. "That was the first Mrs. West," said Mrs. Campbell when she noticed Aurora's interest. "Isabel, a very beautiful woman, very cheerful." There was something in the housekeeper's tone that made Aurora stop. "What happened to her?" "She died 3 years ago, terrible accident." Mrs. Campbell quickened her pace. "Your quarters are right over there." The quarters consisted of a spacious and elegant bedroom, decorated in shades of blue and gold, with dark wood furniture and a balcony overlooking the vineyards. There was also a private bathroom, an unimaginable luxury for someone raised in a monastery, and a closet that seemed larger than the entire dormitory where she had spent her life. "Mr. Dominic asked me to inform you that this is your wing of the house," said Mrs. Campbell, opening the curtains to let in the afternoon light. "There's a library at the end of the corridor and a reading room. The master's bedroom is on the 3rd floor." Aurora nodded, trying to process the information that there would be this physical distance between her and her husband. At the monastery, the sisters always spoke of marriage as a complete union between man and woman, but Dominic seemed determined to maintain some kind of separation. After Mrs. Campbell left, Aurora was alone in the sumptuous room, feeling like an intruder. She approached the window and observed the vineyard stretching as far as the eye could see. Workers moved between the rows of vines, their voices echoing distantly in the afternoon breeze. It was then that she noticed something strange. On the 3rd floor of the mansion, one window had closed curtains and a different appearance from the others, as if it were sealed, abandoned. As she watched, she thought she saw a shadow move behind the curtains, but when she blinked, everything was motionless again. Dinner was served in a formal dining room with a mahogany table for 12, but only she and Dominic were present. He had changed from his suit to more casual clothes, dress pants and a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, revealing strong, tanned forearms. He was more relaxed, but still maintained a courteous distance that made Aurora uncomfortable. The food was refined, dishes she had never tried, accompanied by a red wine that Dominic explained was from the property's special vintage. He talked about the region's history, about the challenges of viticulture in the local climate, about plans to expand the business. Aurora listened, fascinated, but noticed that he carefully avoided any personal references. "You never left that monastery?" he asked when she mentioned her curiosity about the outside world. "Only to go to town with Sister Bernadette, a few times a year, to get medical supplies or handle administrative matters." Aurora took a sip of the wine, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "I always wanted to see other places, but the sisters said the outside world was full of dangerous temptations." Dominic laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "They weren't wrong. Do you regret taking me from there?" The question came out before she could censor herself, and the silence that followed was heavy as lead. Dominic studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes impossible to decipher. "I don't know yet," he said finally, "but you'll soon discover if you regret having come." After dinner, Dominic accompanied her to the staircase but stopped at the 1st floor while she climbed to her quarters. "Good night, Aurora," he said, his voice softer than throughout the evening. "I hope you sleep well." But she didn't sleep well. The bed was too soft after years on the hard monastery mattress. The silence was different. Not the sacred silence she knew, but a heavy silence, laden with secrets. And there were strange sounds, wood creaking, wind moaning at the windows, and sometimes something that could be footsteps in the corridor. On the second night, when the sounds repeated, Aurora decided to investigate. She opened her bedroom door cautiously and peered into the dimly lit corridor with its ancient wall sconces. Everything seemed normal, but there was a door ajar at the end of the corridor that she was sure had been closed before. Barefoot, she approached the door and discovered it led to a narrow staircase, probably a service staircase that connected all floors of the mansion. She could hear something coming from above, a rhythmic sound as if someone were pacing back and forth. Curiosity overcame prudence, and she began to climb the wooden steps, which creaked softly under her bare feet. The sound became clearer as she climbed. They were indeed footsteps, and they seemed to come from the third floor. When she reached the top of the stairs, she found herself in a corridor identical to hers, but with only one visible door, the door that must lead to the room with the sealed window she had noticed from the balcony. And the footsteps were coming from there. Aurora approached the door, her heart beating hard. There was an old lock, but the key was on the outside. She hesitated for a moment, knowing she was invading something that clearly wasn't meant to be invaded. But the need to understand this place, this man, this new life was stronger than fear. She turned the key slowly and pushed the door. The room was plunged in darkness, but the moonlight filtering through the poorly closed curtains revealed a scene that left her breathless. It was a woman's bedroom, decorated in shades of pink and gold, but everything was covered by a fine layer of dust. Elegant furniture, clothes still hanging in the open wardrobe, perfume bottles on the dressing table, as if someone had left recently and would return at any moment. But that wasn't what disturbed her. It was the dressing table mirror, cracked in a star pattern, as if someone had punched it with force, and it was the withered flowers scattered across the floor, as if a bouquet had been torn apart in an explosion of anger. And it was Dominic, sitting in an armchair in the corner of the room with his head in his hands. He raised his eyes when the door creaked, and what Aurora saw there terrified her more than any ghost. It was pure pain, raw, desperate. It was guilt. It was a man being devoured by something he couldn't face or forget. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but his voice was broken. I heard footsteps. I thought..." Aurora took a step back, but something prevented her from fleeing. This was her room, wasn't it? Dominic closed his eyes. "It was Isabel's room, my first wife. Do you come here every night?" "Not every night." He rose slowly, like a much older man than his 38 years. "Only when I can't sleep. When the memories are too strong." Aurora looked around the room, preserved like a sanctuary, feeling a strange mixture of compassion and unease. "How did she die?" The silence that followed was so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. "In an accident. She was driving at night in the rain. She lost control of the car on a curve." He ran his hand through his hair, disheveling it. "We had fought. She had left in fury after a terrible argument. If I had gone after her, it wasn't your fault. You don't know what you're talking about." His voice suddenly hardened. "You know nothing about me, about this family, about the secrets this house keeps." He walked to the window and pulled back the curtains, revealing the view of the vineyards bathed in moonlight. "You came from a pure, protected place. You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have married me." "But I did marry you." Aurora surprised herself with the firmness in her own voice. "And I'm no longer a child protected by the sisters. I'm your wife." Dominic turned to face her, and this time there was something different in his eyes. Not just pain, but something warmer, more dangerous. "My wife," he repeated, as if testing the taste of the words. "Do you know what that means?" Aurora felt her heart accelerate, but kept her gaze steady. "I know it means you don't have to carry your guilt alone." He took a step toward her, then another, until he was close enough for her to feel the heat emanating from his body. "You don't understand. I'm not a good man, Aurora. I've done things, made choices that a woman like you should never know about." "Then tell me." The words came out in a whisper, but they carried a determination she didn't know she possessed. "Tell me who you really are." For a moment she thought he might confess everything right there, in that room haunted by the ghost of his first wife. But then something changed in his expression, as if a mask had slipped back into place. "Go to your room, Aurora," he said, stepping back, "and don't come back here. This place is not for you." She wanted to protest, wanted to insist, but something in the final tone of his voice warned her that there were limits she shouldn't test. Not yet. "Good night, Dominic," she said, but before leaving, she turned once more. She was very beautiful. Isabel. She was. He had returned to the armchair, but his eyes followed Aurora to the door. But beauty isn't always a blessing in this family. Aurora descended the service staircase on trembling legs, returned to her room, and closed the door behind her. But sleep didn't come. Instead, she lay in the darkness thinking about the man upstairs, alone with his memories and guilt, and thinking also about the strange sensation she had felt when he approached her. Not fear, as she should have felt, but something completely different. Something that the sisters had never mentioned in their talks about marriage. Something hot and urgent that awakened in her body reactions she didn't understand. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, Aurora began to suspect that the dangers of that place would come not only from the secrets he hid, but also from what he was awakening inside her. The following days brought a strange routine for Aurora. Dominic disappeared right after breakfast, spending the mornings in the vineyards or in meetings with his business partners in town. She saw him only during meals when he was courteous but distant, as if the intimacy of that night in Isabel's room had never happened. Aurora began exploring the mansion with the curiosity of someone discovering a new world with each opened. Sayakda, the second-floor library, became her favorite refuge, a room with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books in English, Italian, and French. Many were about viticulture and rural property management, but there were also classic literature, books on American history, and surprisingly, several volumes on business law. It was while leafing through one of these legal books that she found the first real clue about the secrets of the West family. Between the yellowed pages of a manual on inheritance, there was a carefully folded newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Virginia vineyard heiress dies in mysterious accident. Police investigate possible link to family disputes." The article was from 3 years ago, a few days after Isabel's death. It spoke of inconclusive investigations, of suspicions that the accident hadn't been so accidental after all, and mentioned a legal dispute between Isabel and other members of the West family over the property inheritance. Dominic's name appeared several times, always described as the grieving widower who refuses to speak to the press. Aurora folded the clipping and tucked it in her dress pocket, feeling a chill in her stomach. If Isabel had been investigating something about the family, if there had been disputes over inheritance, then perhaps her death hadn't been the accident that Dominic had described. That afternoon, she decided to explore other parts of the property. Mrs. Campbell had mentioned there were administrative offices on the ground floor, and perhaps there she would find more information. She descended the main staircase and followed a corridor she hadn't explored before, passing family portraits and antique furniture, until she reached a more modern area of the house. The offices were in an annexed wing connected to the main house by a covered passage. There were 3 rooms, one with computers and files that was clearly used by the vineyard's administration, another that appeared to be Dominic's personal office, and a third that was locked. Dominic's personal office was open, and Aurora hesitated, only a moment before entering. The room was dominated by a dark mahogany desk, with a leather armchair behind it and 2 smaller chairs in front. The walls were covered with bookshelves, wine industry trophies, and some photographs. One of the photographs immediately caught her attention. It was an image of a younger Dominic, perhaps in his early 20s, embracing an older man who was clearly his father. They had the same dark eyes and the same firm line of the jaw. Beside the two, an elegant blonde woman who must have been his mother. Everyone was smiling, but there was something forced about those smiles, as if the photograph had been taken to record a harmony that didn't exist. Looking for something specific? Aurora turned quickly, her heart racing. Dominic was at the office door, still wearing the work clothes he used in the vineyards, jeans, a long-sleeve shirt, and leather boots. He was dirty with soil and sweat, and there was something intense in his gaze that made her instinctively step back. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be here. She began heading for the door, but he didn't move to let her pass. "It's your house too now," he said, but there was irony in his voice. "You have the right to know every corner of it." "I was just exploring. Mrs. Campbell said you spent the morning in the vineyards, and you decided to rummage through my belongings while I was away?" The accusation in his voice put her on the defensive. "I wasn't rummaging through anything. The door was open, and you came in." He walked to the desk, never taking his eyes off her. "Did you find anything interesting?" Aurora felt the newspaper clipping burning in her pocket, but kept her expression neutral. "Just photographs. Your family seemed united." Dominic laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Appearances can be deceiving, especially in this family. He approached her, and Aurora smelled the earth and masculine sweat mixed with something more subtle, the woody cologne he always wore. He was too close, and she found herself backed against the bookshelf, not having realized when she had stepped back. "Are you afraid of me, Aurora?" The question was asked in a low, almost intimate tone, and she felt something warm spreading through her body. It wasn't exactly fear, but something more complex, more dangerous. "Should I be?" Instead of answering, he extended his hand and lightly touched her face, his rough fingers contrasting with the delicacy of the gesture. "You're very different from what I expected." "What did you expect?" "A frightened novice, a woman who would do what she was told without questioning." His thumb traced a line over her cheek. "But you have fire, curiosity. You won't be content to be just a decorative wife." "And does that bother you?" "It should." He leaned a little closer, and Aurora felt his breath against her face. "But it doesn't, and that's what worries me." Before she could respond, he abruptly stepped back, as if he had realized he was crossing a dangerous line. "I'm going to take a shower before dinner," he said, returning to his usual formal tone. "Today we'll dine on the veranda. The sunset is particularly beautiful." And he left the office, leaving Aurora alone with her racing heart and a strange sense of frustration. For the second time he had approached her, had created an intimacy that left her dizzy, and then pulled away as if nothing had happened. That evening, dinner on the veranda was different. Dominic had changed from his work clothes into a light blue dress shirt that highlighted his dark eyes, and he was more relaxed, perhaps because of the wine he had already been drinking before she arrived. The table was set with more care. There were candles lit, and Mrs. Campbell had prepared a special meal, roast lamb with herbs from the property, accompanied by the house's best wine. "Tell me about your life at the monastery," said Dominic after the first course was served. "What were your days like?" It was the first time he had shown real interest in her past, and Aurora was surprised by the question. "Very structured. We woke at 5 for morning prayers, then breakfast in silence. I worked in the garden in the morning, studied in the afternoon, and helped in the kitchen before dinner." "And were you happy?" Aurora hesitated. She had never really asked herself that. "It was safe, predictable. I knew my place, knew what was expected of me. But that doesn't answer whether you were happy." "I don't know if I knew happiness well enough to know if I missed it." She took a sip of the wine, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "And you? Were you happy as a child?" Dominic was silent for a moment, looking at the vineyards stretching down the hill. "When I was very young, perhaps, before I understood how this family worked." "Your mother?" "Died when I was 12. Cancer." His voice hardened. "My father never recovered. Or perhaps he recovered too quickly. 6 months after the funeral, he brought a woman to live here, said I needed a mother figure. Your stepmother, Heather. The name came out as if it was sour. An ambitious woman who married my father for money and status. She had a son from a previous marriage, Mark, 2 years older than me." Aurora realized he was talking about things he clearly didn't usually share, perhaps due to the influence of the wine or the intimate atmosphere of the candlelit veranda. "What happened to them?" "My father died 5 years ago. Heart attack, according to the doctors. But I suspect it was the weight of guilt that finally killed him." Dominic refilled his glass, drinking more than he should. "Heather and Mark thought they would inherit part of the property. They didn't count on the will that my father had changed a year before he died. They were disinherited? Completely. Everything went to me. He smiled, but it was a bitter smile. They didn't take it well. They contested the will, tried to prove that my father was senile when he changed it. The legal battle lasted 2 years. Aurora began to understand the connection. And Isabel, was she involved in this dispute? The name of the first wife created a heavy silence between them. Dominic twirled the wineglass between his fingers, watching the golden liquid reflect the candlelight. Isabel was complicated. She came from an important family in Richmond, accustomed to having influence, to being heard. When she married me, she thought she would have a say in the property's decisions. And she didn't? The traditions of this family are very old, Aurora. Women have always been protected, cared for, but... He hesitated. But they've never had real power. And she didn't accept that. She wanted to modernize everything. She wanted me to make a deal with Heather and Mark, to divide part of the inheritance, to end the legal battle. She said it was the right thing to do. Aurora realized she was treading on dangerous ground, but the need to understand was stronger than prudence. And you didn't want to? You don't know Heather and Mark. Dominic's voice hardened. They didn't just want money. They wanted control. They wanted to destroy everything my family built for generations, sell the land to developers, turn the vineyards into housing developments. So Isabel took their side? In the end, yes. He drank the rest of his wine in one go. On the night she died, we had the worst fight of our marriage. She had discovered some irregularities in my business dealings. Things I did to protect the property from their greed. What kind of irregularities? Dominic studied her for a long moment, as if weighing how much he should reveal. Do you really want to know? Or would you prefer to keep thinking you married an honorable man? The question carried a weight that Aurora felt in her chest. She knew she was at a point of no return. If he told her the truth, she could no longer pretend ignorance, could no longer live in the protected innocence of the monastery. I want to know, she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. Dominic stood up and walked to the veranda railing, looking into the darkness of the vineyards. This property doesn't survive on wine production alone. Not in these times. The competition is fierce, the costs are high, and there's always someone trying to take what's ours. So how does it survive? By offering other services. Discreet ones, for people who need to move money without asking questions, for businessmen who need to solve problems in unconventional ways. Aurora felt her blood run cold. You're talking about money laundering. Among other things, he turned to face her. This region is perfect for it. Isolated, respected, with a family reputation that dispels suspicion. Who would question the business transactions of a century-old vineyard? And Isabel found out. Isabel discovered that I wasn't the honorable man she thought she had married. She discovered that to maintain our life of luxury, to protect our heritage, I had become a partner to people she considered criminals. Aurora felt as if the ground was disappearing beneath her feet. The man for whom she was beginning to feel something was confessing that he was essentially a criminal. Is that why she wanted you to make a deal with Heather and Mark, to get out of these businesses? She wanted me to hand everything over to them and start a new life elsewhere. She said we could sell our part of the property, move abroad, start over. And you didn't want to. This land is my soul, Aurora. It's my family's blood, the sweat of generations. I would rather die than hand it over to Heather and Mark to destroy. He returned to the table, but didn't sit down. He stood behind, the chair hands resting on the back, looking at her with an intensity that left her breathless. Now you know who your husband really is, a man who chose power over love, who chose the land over his wife. Is that why she left that night? Because you fought about this? She gave me an ultimatum. I had 1 week to get out of these businesses, or she would leave, and she would take evidence to the police. The silence that followed was deafening. Aurora felt the weight of that revelation like a stone in her chest. Isabel hadn't died just in an accident. She had died fleeing from a husband who had chosen to protect his criminal businesses rather than protect her. "Did you love her?" she finally asked. The question seemed to take Dominic by surprise. He was silent for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "I thought I did," he said finally. "But true love wouldn't have allowed me to choose as I did. True love would have made me follow her that night, would have made me beg forgiveness, would have made me change. And now, are you still in these businesses? Worse. After Isabel died, after Heather and Mark lost the legal battle, I buried myself even deeper in that world, because I had nothing left to lose, because there was no one left who cared enough to make me stop." He leaned over the table, bringing his face closer to hers. "Until now." Aurora's heart raced. "What does that mean?" "It means that for the first time in 3 years, there's someone in this house who could make me want to be a better man, and that terrifies me." Before she could respond, he was going around the table, pulling her from her chair. His hands held her face with a gentleness that contrasted with the urgency in his eyes. "You should be afraid of me," he whispered. "You should be planning to escape." "I should," she agreed, but didn't move away. "But I'm not." "Why?" "Because at the Fae monastery I learned that everyone carries sins. The difference is that some have the courage to confess, others hide behind false virtue." Dominic studied her as if trying to decipher a mystery. "You're very dangerous, Aurora West." "Why?" "Because you make me want things I thought I had, lost forever." This time, when he kissed her, it wasn't the chaste contact at the altar. It was a hungry, desperate kiss, loaded with 3 years of loneliness and guilt. His hands tangled in her hair, and she felt her body respond in ways she didn't understand, a liquid heat spreading from her center to her extremities. When they separated, both were breathless. Dominic rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. "I shouldn't be doing this to you," he murmured. "Not after everything. I just told you." "Maybe that's exactly why you should," she replied, surprising herself with her own courage. He opened his eyes and looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You're not the innocent girl I sought at the monastery." "No, I'm not anymore." "Are you sure you want to discover who you really are? Because once we start this, there's no going back." In response, she rose on tiptoe and kissed him again, pouring into that kiss all the curiosity, all the frustration, all the desire that had been awakening inside her since she arrived at that house. This time it was Dominic who pulled away, but his eyes shone with something she hadn't seen before, not just desire, but something deeper, more dangerous. "Not here," he said, looking around the illuminated veranda. "Not where any staff member can see us." He took her by the hand and led her back into the house, climbing the main staircase to the 2nd floor. But instead of stopping in the corridor of her quarters, he continued climbing to the 3rd floor. "Dominic, where are we going?" "To my room," he replied without looking back. "If we're going to do this, it will be done properly." Dominic's room occupied an entire side of the 3rd floor, with large windows that gave a view of the vineyards and the distant mountains. It was decorated in masculine tones, dark woods, leather, neutral colors, but there was a sober luxury that spoke of wealth without ostentation. When the door closed behind them, Aurora felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She was alone in a man's bedroom for the first time in her life, and not just any man, her husband, a man who had just confessed to being involved in criminal activities, a man who carried the guilt for his first wife's death. Dominic stopped, in the center of the room, his back to her, hands in his pockets. "There's still time to change your mind," he said without turning around. "You can leave now and pretend this conversation never happened." "And you? Do you want me to leave?" "No." The answer was immediate, definitive. "But I don't want you to do something you'll regret." Aurora approached him from behind, lightly touching his back through his shirt. She felt him tense under her. "Touch? The only thing I regret is having waited so long to do this." He turned then, and what she saw in his eyes left her breathless. It was desire, yes, but also something that seemed suspiciously like adoration. "Are you sure?" In response, She began unbuttoning her own blouse, her fingers trembling slightly. She didn't know exactly what she was doing, but she knew she wanted to do it. She wanted to discover the secrets of her own body, wanted to know a man's touch, wanted to feel alive in a way she had never experienced. Dominic watched her in silence, his dark eyes following every movement of her fingers. When the blouse fell to the floor, revealing the simple undershirt beneath, he took a step toward her. "You're beautiful," he murmured, touching her face with reverence. "More beautiful than any man deserves." "Then show me what it's like to be desired," she whispered. And he showed her, with gentle but firm hands, with kisses that explored every inch of exposed skin, with words murmured in English and Italian that she didn't fully understand, but that made her body vibrate with pleasure. When they finally gave themselves to each other, it was with an urgency that spoke of much more than simple physical attraction. It was the hunger of two lonely people who finally found connection, the need of two wounded hearts finding healing in each other's touch. Afterward, lying in the darkness of the room, with Aurora nestled against Dominic's chest, she finally found the courage to ask the question that had haunted her since she found the newspaper clipping. "Dominic? Yes? Did you kill Isabel?" The silence that followed was so long that she thought he had fallen asleep. When he finally answered, his voice was barely audible. "Not directly, but my choices killed her. That's not the same thing." "To me it is." His arms tightened around her. "And to you? Does it change anything to know that I'm responsible for my first wife's death?" Aurora was silent, thinking. She should be horrified, should be planning to escape. But all she felt was a strange compassion for this man who carried so much weight alone. "It changes things," she said finally, "because now I know you need someone to prevent you from making the same choice again. And you think you can be that person?" "I think I already am." He kissed the top of her head, and she felt something wet touch her hair. Could it be that Dominic West, the man who controlled one of the largest vineyard properties in Virginia, was crying? "You don't know what you're getting into," he whispered. "Then teach me." And in the darkness of that room, while the vineyards whispered secrets in the night breeze, Aurora knew her life had changed forever. She was no longer the innocent novice from the monastery. She was the wife of a dangerous man, involved in a web of secrets and crimes that she had barely begun to understand. But for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. Aurora woke to the first rays of sunlight entering through the wide windows of Dominic's bedroom, her body still tender and sensitive from the discoveries of the previous night. For a moment, she felt disoriented, accustomed to the austere environment of her own room. Then the memories came rushing back like a warm wave, the kisses, the confessions, the way Dominic had touched her, as if she were something precious and fragile at the same time. She turned, expecting to find him beside her, but the bed was empty. Only the pillow still held his scent, that mixture of woody cologne and something purely masculine that she would now recognize anywhere. From the bathroom came the sound of running water. He was taking a shower. She sat up in bed, pulling the sheet to cover her naked body, and for the first time since arriving at the mansion, she felt truly at home, not just because she had discovered the pleasures of physical intimacy, but because she finally had the sense of belonging somewhere, of having a purpose beyond prayers and obedience. The sound of water stopped, and moments later, Dominic emerged from the bathroom with only a towel wrapped around his waist. Drops of water still ran down the defined muscles of his chest, and when his eyes met hers, a slow, sensual smile curved his lips. "Good morning," he said, approaching the bed. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than any night in my life," she answered, honestly, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks as she remembered how bold she had been in the hours of darkness. Dominic sat on the edge of the bed and reached out to touch her face. "Any regrets?" "What about you?" "Never." He leaned in to kiss her, a gentle kiss that quickly intensified when she wrapped her arms around his neck. "But we need to talk about some things." "What kind of things?" Dominic sighed and pulled away, running his hand through his still damp hair. Last night after you fell asleep, I received a call. Heather and Mark are coming here. Aurora felt a chill in her stomach. When? This afternoon. They say they want to resolve pending family matters. He stood up and began to dress, his movements tense. It's never been a good thing when those two decide to show up together. What do they want? I'm not entirely sure, but I suspect it has to do with you. With me? Aurora sat up straighter, surprised. But they don't even know me. They know enough. Heather has contacts everywhere, and I'm sure she's already investigated every detail of your life. Dominic put on his shirt and turned to face her, including things you might not know yourself. There was something in his tone that made her uneasy. What are you talking about? Aurora, haven't you ever wondered why you were abandoned specifically at that monastery? Why I knew exactly where to find you? Why the sisters so easily agreed to hand you over to me in marriage? The questions hit her like punches to the stomach. In truth, yes, she had wondered about these things, but had always assumed they were coincidences, that God had guided the events of her life. Are you suggesting that... She couldn't finish the sentence. I'm saying that your presence in that monastery, our marriage, all of this, might be part of a much larger plan than we imagine. Aurora got out of bed, wrapping herself in the sheet, and walked to the window. The vineyard stretched as far as the eye could see, but now they seemed less welcoming, more threatening. Do Heather and Mark have something to do with this? That's what I intend to find out today. Dominic approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her. But I promise you one thing, I won't let them hurt you. And if they have information about who I really am, about my true family, then we'll face that together. The firmness in his voice reassured her a little, but Aurora couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to be turned upside down once again. After Dominic left for his morning activities, promising to be back before the visitors arrived, Aurora decided she wouldn't wait passively. If Heather and Mark were coming with information about her past, she wanted to be prepared. She returned to Dominic's office, this time with a specific purpose. If he was involved in questionable businesses, he must have files, documents, something that would explain his family's connections. And if there was something about herself that she didn't know, perhaps she would find clues there. The desk was too organized, with no important papers left in sight, but there were drawers, and one of them was locked. Aurora searched for a key, checking under decorative objects and inside other compartments, until she found it taped to the underside of the desk. The locked drawer revealed organized folders with names and dates. One of them immediately caught her attention: St. Catherine's Monastery, donations and correspondence. Inside, she found receipts for bank transfers dating back more than 20 years, long before Dominic married Isabel, long before she herself was born. There were also letters. Correspondence between Dominic and Sister Bernadette that spoke of the girl in vague but careful terms. One letter in particular left her cold. Dear Dominic, as per our agreement, the child is being raised without knowledge of her origins. She is a sweet and obedient girl who will grow to be a suitable wife when the time comes. The physical characteristics you mentioned are developing as expected. The golden hair is exactly as you described. The letter was dated 15 years ago, when Aurora was only 4 years old. Dominic had been watching her for so long, planning this marriage since she was a child. With trembling hands, she continued reading. There were photographs, images of her at different ages, always from a distance, as if they had been taken secretly during the rare outings from the monastery. And there was another document that made her feel as if the ground was disappearing, a birth certificate with her name, but with information about parents she had never seen. Mother's name, Isabella Matthews. Father's name, Joseph West. Joseph. West, Dominic's father. Aurora let the papers fall, her heart beating so hard she could hear it. If that birth certificate was real, if Joseph West was really her father, it meant that she and Dominic were half-siblings. It meant that their marriage was not only arranged, but incestuous. But there was more. In the same folder she found a medical report about Joseph West, dated a few months before his death. The report mentioned revelations about previous paternity and need for legal recognition of illegitimate descendant for patrimonial protection. Joseph had discovered her existence shortly before he died, and he had changed his will not only to disinherit Heather and Mark, but to include a clause about descendants not previously recognized. Aurora was studying the documents with growing horror when she heard voices coming from the main courtyard. She ran to the window and saw a black Mercedes parked at the entrance, from which a man and a woman elegantly dressed were getting out. Heather and Mark had arrived earlier than expected. Quickly, she photographed the most important documents with a cell phone Dominic had given her, put everything back in the drawer, and ran to her room. She needed to compose herself, needed to understand what these revelations meant before facing the people who might have even more answers. But she didn't have time. Mrs. Campbell knocked on her door a few minutes later, informing her that the visitors were asking to speak with her immediately. "They said it's about urgent family matters," explained the housekeeper, but there was concern in her eyes. "Mr. Dominic hasn't returned yet." Aurora dressed quickly in one of the most elegant dresses she owned, a navy blue ensemble that Dominic had specially ordered for her. If she was going to face Heather and Mark, she would do it with dignity. She found them in the main drawing room, seated on the leather sofas as if they owned the house. Heather was a woman of approximately 50, platinum blonde, with the kind of beauty that spoke of expensive plastic surgeries and a lot of money spent on maintenance. Mark, her son, seemed to have inherited from her the taste for ostentation. He wore a clearly imported suit and a watch worth more than most people earned in a year. "So you're the new Mrs. West," said Heather, studying Aurora from head to toe with calculating eyes. "Very young, very innocent, very—" "It's a pleasure to meet you," replied Aurora, keeping her voice firm despite her nervousness. "The pleasure is ours, dear," said Mark, but there was something unpleasant about his smile, especially considering that we're practically family. The choice of words was not accidental, and Aurora felt that they knew exactly who she was. "Isn't Dominic here?" asked Heather, looking around as if expecting him to appear. "He's taking care of matters in the vineyards. He should return shortly." "What a pity. We wanted to speak with both of you together." Heather crossed her legs elegantly. "But perhaps it's better this way. Some conversations are easier between women." Aurora sat in the armchair facing the two, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "What would you like to talk about?" "About your true identity, dear," said Mark, "and how it completely changes the situation of this property." "I don't know what you're talking about." Heather laughed, a humorless sound. "Of course you do, or at least you suspect. An intelligent girl like you must have wondered why Dominic sought you specifically at that monastery, why he became interested in an orphaned novice when he could have chosen any woman from high society. He explained to me that he wanted a wife who wouldn't ask questions," interrupted Mark, "who would accept anything without questioning. My dear sister-in-law, you were very misinformed about the reasons for your marriage." Sister-in-law. The word echoed in Aurora's mind like a funeral bell. "Let's stop pretending," said Heather, opening a leather folder she had brought. "We know who you are, Isabella Matthews West, illegitimate daughter of Joseph West with one of his Italian mistresses." Aurora tried to keep her expression neutral, but she knew her surprise was written on her face. "Ah, so Dominic hasn't told that part of the story yet," observed Heather with cruel satisfaction. "How interesting. He married his own half-sister and didn't have the courage to tell the truth." "That's impossible," murmured Aurora, but her voice sounded weak even to herself. "It's very possible, and we have the proof." Mark took documents from the folder. Original birth certificate, DNA tests that Joseph had done secretly before he died, and the final will that acknowledges your existence and your rights to the family inheritance. Aurora took the papers with trembling hands. They were different from those she had found in Dominic's office. These were more complete, more official, and they confirmed her worst suspicion. She was the daughter of Joseph West. "Joseph discovered your existence through Heather," continued Mark. She had hired investigators to find any information that could be used against Dominic in the dispute over the inheritance. Imagine her surprise when she discovered there was a secret daughter that not even Dominic himself knew about. "Why are you telling me this?" asked Aurora, still trying to process the information. "Because you're entitled to 50% of this property," said Heather, "and we're here to help you claim what's yours." "In exchange for what?" Heather smiled, and for the first time she seemed genuinely pleased. "In exchange for you divorcing Dominic and partnering with us to properly manage the property, away from the dirty businesses he maintains." "You know about his businesses?" "We know everything, dear," said Mark. "Money laundering, facilitating, illegal transactions, connections with very dangerous people. Joseph may have protected Dominic while he was alive, but now there's no one left to cover up his activities." Aurora felt as if she were on an emotional roller coaster. In less than 24 hours, she had discovered that her husband was a criminal, had lost her virginity to him, and now discovered that he was her half-brother and that she was entitled to a fortune. "And if I don't want to divorce him?" The question came out before she could censor herself, and the two visitors exchanged significant looks. "My dear," said Heather in a condescending tone, "you were raised by nuns, lived isolated from the world for 19 years. You know nothing about relationships, about men, about real life. Dominic took advantage of your innocence. Besides," added Mark, "he committed a crime by marrying you. Incest is a crime in the United States, even when those involved don't know about the relationship." "But I didn't know either." "Of course you didn't," said Heather with false sympathy. "You're the victim in this story. That's why we're here to help you." Aurora studied the two, trying to understand their true motivations. It was obvious they weren't there out of kindness. They wanted something from her, and it was probably much more than a simple business partnership. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. "Of course," agreed Heather, "but not too much time. We have information that the FBI is investigating Dominic's activities. It would be better for you to distance yourself from him before the scandal breaks." "How much time do I have?" "1 week," said Mark. "After that, we'll be forced to take more drastic measures to protect our interests and yours." The threat was clear, even wrapped in civilized language. Aurora stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "I'll consider your proposal," she said. "But now I'd like you to leave. My husband won't be happy to find you here when he returns." Heather and Mark stood up as well, but their expressions showed they weren't accustomed to being dismissed so easily. "One last thing, dear," said Heather, stopping at the door. "Isabella Matthews, your mother, didn't die in childbirth as the nuns told you. She was murdered." Aurora felt her blood freeze. "What? Murdered by Joseph West?" "When she threatened to reveal the affair and demand recognition for you." Heather smiled with cruelty. "Ask your husband if he knew. Ask if the West family has a habit of silencing inconvenient women." And with that they left, leaving Aurora alone with revelations that seemed to destroy everything she had believed about her life, her marriage, and her identity. She stood in the room for several minutes, trying to process what she had just heard. She was the illegitimate daughter of Joseph West. Her mother had been murdered. Her marriage to Dominic was technically incestuous, and Heather and Mark wanted to use her to take over the property. When she finally managed to move, she ran upstairs to her room and locked the door. She needed to organize her thoughts, needed to decide whom to trust. The documents that Heather and Mark had shown seemed genuine, but they clearly had their own interests. And Dominic had lied to her, or at least omitted crucial truths. She was sitting on the bed, still trying to organize her thoughts, when she heard the sound of an SUV arriving in the courtyard. Dominic had returned. A few minutes later, he was knocking at her bedroom door. "Aurora," Mrs. Campbell said. "Heather and Mark were here. Is everything all right?" She opened the door and he immediately knew something was wrong. Her eyes were red, her hands were trembling, and there was a tension in her body that hadn't been there that morning. "What did they tell you?" he asked, entering the room and closing the door. "The truth," she replied, carefully observing his reaction, or at least part of it. Dominic closed his eyes and ran his hand over his face. What truth? That I'm Joseph West's daughter, that we're half-siblings, that our marriage is incestuous and that you knew it all along. The silence that followed was deafening. Dominic didn't deny it, didn't protest, didn't seem surprised. He just sat heavily on the edge of the bed. Not all along, he said finally. I found out 3 years ago, shortly before my father died. He confessed to me about Isabella, about you, about what he had done. And you decided to marry me anyway. I decided to marry you because of it. He raised his eyes to face her. You're my family, Aurora. The only family I have left. I couldn't let Heather and Mark discover your existence and use you against me. So you used me first. In the beginning, yes. The brutal honesty in his voice surprised her. But it's not like that anymore. After last night, after really getting to know you, it's not just about protection or convenience anymore. What is it then? It's love, he said simply. Wrong, complicated, forbidden, but it's love. Aurora felt tears burning her eyes. How can it be love? We're siblings. We're half-siblings who met as adults, who were raised separately, who didn't share a childhood or a family upbringing. Dominic moved closer to her. I know it's complicated, I know society will judge, but what I feel for you is real. Heather said our mother was murdered by Joseph. Dominic nodded gravely. It's true, Isabella threatened exposure, scandal. Joseph was young, ambitious, and had a lot to lose, so he solved the problem permanently. And you don't care that your father was a murderer? Of course I care. Why do you think I've spent my entire life trying to be different from him? Dominic took her hands. Why do you think I'd try to protect you? Protect? You lied to me, manipulated me, married me, knowing we were siblings. Because it was the only way to keep you safe. His voice rose for the first time. Heather and Mark would eventually find out about you, and when they did, they would have used you as a weapon against me. Or worse, they would have found a way to eliminate you like Joseph did with Isabella. So all this passion between us, all the intimacy, was just you protecting me? Dominic pulled her to him, forcing her to look into his eyes. What happened between us last night had nothing to do with protection or manipulation. It was real. It was true. And it was the first time in years that I felt truly alive. Aurora wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that at least the feelings were genuine. But there were so many lies, so many revelations, that she no longer knew what to trust. Heather and Mark want me to divorce you and partner with them to manage the property. And will you do that? The question carried so much fear, so much vulnerability, that she felt her heart tighten. Despite everything, the lies, the shocking revelations, the moral complexity of the situation, Dominic seemed genuinely terrified at the possibility of losing her. I don't know, she said. Honestly, I need time to think, to understand what all this means. How much time? Heather gave me a week to decide. Dominic laughed bitterly. How generous of her. Dominic, I need to know one thing, and I need you to be completely honest. With me. Anything you want. Did you kill Isabel? For real this time? Not metaphorically, not through your choices. Did you physically kill your first wife? He looked into her eyes for a long moment, and when he answered, his voice was firm and clear. No, I didn't kill Isabel, but I know who did. The revelation hit Aurora like lightning. Who? Mark. He discovered that Isabel was gathering evidence against me. Evidence that could not only destroy me, but also reveal connections that compromised other family businesses. Heather ordered it, and Mark executed it. Do you have proof? Some. Not enough for a court, but enough for my own conscience. And you never tried to expose them. How? Without compromising myself and all the businesses that keep this property running? Dominic sighed. Besides, Isabel was already dead. Exposing Mark wouldn't bring her back. Aurora moved away from him, walking to the window. Outside, the vineyards looked peaceful in the afternoon light, but she now knew they hid bloody secrets. So Heather and Mark killed Isabel, Joseph killed my mother, and you chose to marry me to protect me from being the next victim. Basically, yes. And do they know that you know about Isabel? They suspect, that's why they've never tried anything direct against me. We know too much about each other for an open war. Until now. Until now, agreed Dominic. Your existence changes the balance of power. If you join them, they can destroy me without consequences. If you stay with me, we'll have enough strength to resist. And if I don't want to choose either side, what if I just want to leave, start a new life away from all this madness? Dominic approached her again, but this time he didn't try to touch her. You can try, but they'll never leave you in peace. You know too many secrets, have too many rights to the inheritance. Heather and Mark will pursue you for the rest of your life. And you? I would follow you to the ends of the earth, if necessary. But I wouldn't leave you in peace either, because now I know I can't live without you. The confession was made with a devastating simplicity that made Aurora's heart race. Despite everything, the impossible circumstances, the family secrets, the questionable morality, she knew she felt the same. We're completely crazy, she murmured. Probably, agreed Dominic. But crazy together is better than sane and alone. Aurora turned to face him, studying his face as if trying to decipher the truth behind his words. If we stay together, if we face Heather and Mark, will you stop the illegal businesses? If that's what you want, it is. Then yes, we'll find a way to clean up the family business. And about our relationship? How are we going to deal with that? Dominic hesitated. I don't know. Maybe we'll have to live with this secret for the rest of our lives. Maybe we'll have to leave Virginia, go somewhere where nobody knows us. Or maybe we'll have to accept that some forms of love are stronger than social conventions. He looked at her with surprise. Are you saying you want to stay, even knowing everything? I'm saying that for the first time in my life, I have a real choice, and I choose you. Dominic pulled her into his arms then, kissing her with an intensity that spoke of relief, gratitude, and a desperate love that defied all rules. It won't be easy, he murmured against her lips. Nothing worth having is easy, she replied. And as they gave themselves to each other once more, both knew they had just declared war against Heather and Mark, against society, and against the very circumstances that had brought them together. But they also knew they would face it all together. The battle for the West family was just beginning. The next 3 days passed in almost unbearable tension. Dominic cancelled all business meetings and remained on the property, as if his presence could protect Aurora from some invisible threat. She, in turn, immersed herself in a meticulous investigation, using her new position as an heiress to access family archives that were previously beyond her reach. It was on the 3rd day that she found what she was looking for. Hidden in a secret room behind the library, a compartment she discovered only by accident when one of the oldest books moved in a strange way, there was an antique safe. The combination was noted in a personal agenda of Joseph's, and inside the safe, Aurora found a collection of documents that would change everything. Letters from Isabella Matthews to Joseph, dated a few days before her death. In these letters, her biological mother not only confirmed the paternity, but also threatened to expose other secrets of the West family, including connections to criminal groups and evidence of corruption dating back decades. But most shocking were the recordings. Old cassette tapes with conversations between Joseph and people Aurora didn't recognize, discussing the Isabella problem and how to silence her permanently. One of the voices was clearly Heather's, much younger but unmistakable. And there was more. Financial documents showing suspicious transfers, photographs of secret meetings, and even a private investigation report that Joseph had commissioned on Heather and Mark's activities. A report revealing they had been planning to take over the EE property for more than a decade. Aurora studied everything meticulously, photographed each document with her cell phone, and then had an idea that surprised her with its own audacity. She wasn't just going to defend herself from Heather and Mark, she was going to attack. That night during dinner, she shared her discovery with Dominic, watching his expression change from surprise to admiration as she explained her plan. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked when she finished. It's dangerous. If they feel cornered, they might try something desperate." "They already tried something desperate when they killed Isabel," Aurora replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. "And they killed my mother before that. I'm not going to wait to be next." Dominic studied her with a mixture of pride and concern. The woman sitting across from him was no longer the shy novice he had brought from the monastery. In just a few days, Aurora had transformed into someone capable of confronting the worst aspects of his family with a courage that he himself had taken years to develop. "We need help," he said finally. "We can't face Heather and Mark alone." "I've already thought about that." Aurora smiled, and there was something almost predatory in that smile. "Remember you said you had some evidence about Isabel's murder, but not enough for a court?" "Yes. Well, now we have evidence about my mother, too, and I have a friend who can help us." "What friend?" "Sister Bernadette." Dominic looked at her with surprise. "The Mother Superior of the monastery." "The same Mother Superior who corresponded with you for years about me, who received generous donations from the West family, and who probably knows much more about these secrets than anyone imagines." Aurora leaned over the table. She may not have directly participated in the crimes, but she was certainly complicit in keeping me ignorant about my true identity. "And you think she'll help us?" "I think she'll do anything to save the monastery's reputation when she learns that all the donations she received came from dirty money." The next day, Aurora called Sister Bernadette and arranged a meeting at the monastery. Dominic offered to accompany her, but she refused. This conversation needed to happen between women. The 2-hour journey to the monastery gave her time to organize her thoughts and prepare emotionally to confront the woman who had been her maternal figure for 19 years. When the familiar gates appeared in view, Aurora felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and anger. Sister Bernadette received her in the Mother Superior's office, the same austere environment where she had announced the arranged marriage. But this time, the dynamic was completely different. Aurora was no longer an obedient girl. She was a woman who came seeking answers. "You're different," observed the Mother Superior after the formal greetings. "Marriage has been good for you." "Marriage has opened my eyes," replied Aurora, "to many things you hid from me." Sister Bernadette sighed as if she knew this moment would eventually come. "What have you discovered?" "That I'm Joseph West's daughter, that my mother was murdered by him, that you knew everything and kept me in ignorance for years." Aurora took some of the documents from her bag, "and that the monastery survived financially thanks to blood-stained money." The Mother Superior paled as Aurora presented the evidence. The letters between her and Dominic, the donation receipts, the childhood photographs of Aurora that had been secretly sent. "We didn't know about the murders," said Sister Bernadette finally. "We only knew that Joseph had a daughter who needed to be protected, educated away from the family." "Protected from what?" "From Heather and Mark. Joseph told us they were dangerous, that they would do anything to destroy the legitimate West lineage. So you knew I had a right to the inheritance. We knew you were an unrecognized heiress. Joseph paid us to raise you properly, to educate you to be a worthy wife when the time came." Aurora felt nauseated. "You raised me as a product, a commodity, to be delivered when convenient." "We loved you like a daughter," protested Sister Bernadette, but her voice lacked conviction. "We did the best we could under the circumstances." Circumstances that included accepting dirty money and lying to a child about her identity her entire life. Sister Bernadette stood and walked to the window that overlooked the garden where Aurora had spent so many hours working. "What do you want from us now?" "I want you to testify. I want you to confess everything to the police. I want you to help bring justice for the deaths of Isabella Matthews and Isabel West." "And if we refuse?" Aurora stood too, approaching the Mother Superior. "Then I'll publicly expose that this monastery was funded for decades with money from criminal activities. I'll sue you for emotional kidnapping and identity falsification. And I'll make sure each of the sisters knows exactly what kind of business sustained their prayers." The threat was made with an icy calm that surprised even Aurora. She didn't recognize the cold, calculating woman she had become. "You've changed a lot," murmured Sister Bernadette. "I had to change. You didn't leave me a choice." After a long pause, the Mother Superior nodded. "What do you need us to do?" "First, I want you to sign a detailed confession about everything you know. Second, I want access to all monastery archives related to the West family. And third, when the time comes, I want you to testify against Heather and Mark. And in return, I'll ensure the monastery receives legitimate donations to compensate for the loss of the West contributions. And I won't publicly destroy the congregation's reputation. It was pure and simple blackmail, and they both knew it, but it was also justice." Aurora returned to the property at nightfall, carrying a folder with signed confessions, historical documents, and even some photographs that the sisters had taken secretly over the years. Dominic was waiting for her on the veranda, and when he saw her triumphant expression, he smiled for the first time in days. "Did you get it?" "I got everything." She sat beside him and rested her head on his shoulder. "Now we have enough evidence to completely destroy Heather and Mark. And the next step? We set up a meeting tomorrow night, here at the property." Aurora lifted her head to look at him. "And we end this once and for all." Dominic kissed her gently. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" "More than ready. It's time to avenge my mother and Isabel." The meeting was scheduled for 8 o'clock the following evening. Heather and Mark arrived punctually, bringing with them 2 men in suits who were clearly security or lawyers. Aurora and Dominic received them in the main drawing room, but this time the dynamic was completely different. "We hope you've considered our proposal," said Heather, settling into the sofa with the confidence of someone who thought they held all the cards. "I've considered it," replied Aurora, "and I have a counter-proposal." "What kind of counter-proposal?" asked Mark, slightly suspicious. Aurora opened the folder she had brought and began distributing copies of the documents on the table. "The proposal that you confess to the murders of Isabella Matthews and Isabel West and turn yourselves into the police. In exchange, I won't publicly release all the evidence I have about your crimes." The silence that followed was absolute. Heather picked up one of the documents, and her expression changed dramatically as she read. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice tense. "Where doesn't matter. What matters is that I have recordings of Joseph discussing my mother's murder. With you, Heather. I have financial evidence linking Mark to the car that killed Isabel, and I have witnesses willing to confirm everything in court." Mark stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You have nothing that could harm us." "I have this," said Aurora, placing a small recorder on the table and pressing play. Heather's voice, younger but unmistakable, echoed through the room. "The Italian woman is becoming a problem. Joseph needs to resolve this before she exposes everything. Yes, permanently. We can't afford to have witnesses." Heather turned pale. "Where did you get that recording?" Joseph was a careful man. He recorded all important conversations. Aurora smiled coldly. "Including the one where you convinced Mark to sabotage the brakes on Isabel's car." "This is fabricated," protested Mark, but there was panic in his voice. "It's the truth," said Aurora simply, "and you both know it." Dominic, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. "You have 2 options. Confess everything and serve your sentence, or I turn all of this over to the FBI along with evidence about all the illegal businesses you tried to force me to participate in over the years." "You wouldn't do that," said Heather. "It would implicate you two." "I'm getting out of those businesses anyway," replied Dominic. "Aurora convinced me to clean up my life. I can face the consequences of my past choices." "But you can't face the consequences of yours," added Aurora. 2 murders, blackmail, attempting to illegally take over property. You'll spend the rest of your lives in prison." Heather looked at the men she had brought, but they seemed as shocked as she was by the revelations. Clearly they didn't know the true scope of the family's crimes. "What do you want exactly?" Heather finally asked. "Complete written confession, voluntary surrender to the police, and transfer of any right you think you have over this property directly to me." Aurora leaned forward. In exchange, I won't make public the recordings I have of you discussing how to torture Isabella before killing her." The last revelation was like a bomb. Even Dominic looked at Aurora with surprise. She hadn't mentioned she had evidence of torture. "You're monsters," said Mark, trying to sound indignant, but his voice trembled. "We're monsters," replied Aurora, her voice rising for the first time. "You killed a pregnant woman. You murdered an innocent woman who just wanted to protect her husband from your dirty business. And then you had the audacity to come here and try to manipulate me to get what you wanted." She stood up, trembling with anger. "My mother was tortured for 3 days before Joseph finally killed her. Isabel died terrified, alone on a dark road, knowing she had been betrayed by her own brother-in-law. And you think I'm going to pity you now?" Heather and Mark exchanged desperate looks. It was obvious they hadn't expected Aurora to know so much, to have so much evidence. "How long do we have to decide?" asked Heather. 10 minutes, replied Aurora. "After that, I call the FBI and hand over everything I have." The 10 minutes that followed were the longest of Aurora's life. Heather and Mark whispered desperately to each other, occasionally consulting the men they had brought. Dominic remained at Aurora's side, his hand finding hers in a silent show of support. When the time was up, Heather stood with the posture of a defeated woman. "We'll confess," she said, "but we want guarantees that the evidence about torture won't be publicly released." "Agreed," said Aurora, "as long as the confession is complete and detailed." What followed were 2 hours of written confessions signed and witnessed. Heather confessed her role in planning Isabella's murder and in manipulating Joseph. Mark confessed that he had sabotaged Isabel's car and had tried to make it look like an accident. When the police arrived, called by Dominic himself, they found 2 confessed murderers and enough evidence to ensure convictions for qualified homicide. Aurora watched Heather and Mark being led away in handcuffs, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. 20 years of mystery about her identity, 3 years of pain over Isabel's death, decades of family crimes, all resolved in a single night. "How do you feel?" asked Dominic when they were alone in the room. "I don't know," she answered. "Honestly. Relieved, I guess, but also empty. Justice doesn't always bring the satisfaction we expect." "It's not that." Aurora turned to face him. "It's that now that everything has been resolved, we have to decide who we really are, what we're going to do with our life." Dominic pulled her into his arms. "I know exactly what I want to do." "What?" "I want to marry you again, the right way this time. Without lies, without secrets, without arrangements." He smiled. "I want to propose to you properly and have a ceremony where we're both there for love." Aurora laughed, feeling tears run down her face. "We're half-siblings, Dominic. It's complicated." "Then we'll go somewhere where it's not complicated. Europe, perhaps, where no one knows our family history." He wiped her tears with his thumb. "Or we stay here and face the judgments. I don't care as long as we're together." "And the illegal businesses?" "I've already spoken with my contacts. I'm getting out of everything. We're going to transform this property into a completely legitimate vineyard. It might take time, it might mean less profit, but I don't want to live looking over my shoulder anymore." Aurora kissed him then, pouring into that kiss all the love, all the gratitude, all the hope she felt. When they separated, both were breathless. "So that's it?" she asked. "We're really going to try to be happy despite everything?" "We're going to be happy because of everything," corrected Dominic, "because we survived, because we found each other, because we chose love even when it seemed impossible." 6 months later, they were in a small church in Tuscany, Italy, exchanging vows for the second time. This time there were no stern sisters or unwanted guests, just a few close friends they had made in the region, the local priest who knew nothing about their family history, and Mrs. Campbell, who had insisted on traveling to see her girl get married properly. Aurora wore a simple white lace dress she had chosen herself, and her golden hair was loose, shining in the light that entered through the colored stained glass windows. Dominic wore a dark suit, but his eyes shone with a joy she had never seen before. When it came time for the vows, Dominic took her hands and spoke with a clear voice that echoed through the small church. Aurora, when I met you, I thought I was saving you, but I discovered it was you who was saving me. You taught me that true love is stronger than any secret, more powerful than any fear, more lasting than any judgment. He smiled, and there were tears in his eyes. I promise to love you, protect you, and honor you, not because arrangements or circumstances united us, but because I choose you every day. Aurora wiped her own tears before responding. Dominic, you showed me there's a world beyond the monastery walls, beyond fear, beyond blind obedience. You taught me that I'm strong enough to fight for what I want, brave enough to face any truth, and deserving of a love that transforms me every day. She squeezed his hands. I promise to be your partner, your equal, your companion in all the adventures that await us. When the priest declared them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was different from all the others. There was no urgency, no desperation, no secrets. It was just pure love, celebrated in daylight, witnessed by the world. The celebration, after the ceremony, was small but joyful, held at a local vineyard that had lent them the space. They danced under the stars, among the vines that reminded them of home, surrounded by people who loved them for who they were now, not for who they had been. Any regrets? Asked Dominic as they danced to a slow song. Just one, replied Aurora. Which? One? That I didn't have the courage to do this 6 months ago. Dominic laughed and twirled her. We needed time to heal, to learn who we really are away from all the secrets. And who are we? We're two survivors who refuse to let the past destroy the future. We're a family that chose to form through love, not blood. He pulled her closer. We're Aurora and Dominic Rivers. They had changed their surname when they moved to Italy, a symbolic way to start fresh, free from the weight of the West family history. And what does the future hold for Aurora and Dominic Rivers? Our own vineyard here in Tuscany, children perhaps, adventures around the world, a life built on truth and love. Sounds perfect. It will be. 2 years later, Aurora was pregnant with their first child, working alongside her husband in the vineyard they had bought with money from selling part of the property in Virginia. The original property continued to operate under professional management, now completely clean of illegal activities, but they preferred to live in Italy, where they could just be a young couple in love without a complicated history. Heather and Mark had been sentenced to life imprisonment for the murders of Isabella and Isabel. The scandal had shaken Virginia high society, but in the end the truth had prevailed. Sister Bernadette had visited them once, asking for forgiveness and trying to redeem herself for the years of lies. Aurora had forgiven her, but made it clear that her life now followed another path. Sometimes I still wonder if we did the right thing, said Aurora on a sunny afternoon as she watched Dominic working among the vines. Abandoning everything, coming here, living as if the past doesn't matter. And what's your conclusion? He asked, approaching and placing his hand on her rounded belly. That sometimes starting over is the only way to truly live. Dominic kissed her forehead. We didn't abandon everything. We brought what mattered. Our love, our choice to be together, our determination to be happy. And we left the rest behind. We left behind the pain, the secrets, the guilt. He smiled. Our child will grow up knowing only love, not the sins of previous generations. That night, lying in bed in their simple but cozy home, surrounded by the scent of the vines and the soft sound of the wind in the Tuscan hills, Aurora reflected on the extraordinary journey that had taken her from the silent monastery in Virginia to this moment of complete happiness. She had begun as an innocent novice, handed over in marriage as payment for a debt. She had discovered terrible secrets about her family, faced murderers, defied social morality, and chosen a love that the world would consider wrong. But in the end, she had learned that true strength didn't come from blind obedience or social conformity. It came from the courage to make one's own choices, to fight for one's own happiness, to create a family based on love and not on circumstances. "I love you," she whispered to Dominic in the darkness. "Forever," he whispered back. "Forever." And, under the stars of Tuscany, two hearts that had found each other through impossibilities continued beating in sync, promising a future built on free choices, true love, and the unbreakable determination to be happy together, regardless of what the world thought. Love had won. Truth had prevailed. And Aurora Rivers, who had once been Aurora with no surname, finally knew the meaning of the word home,